Most of us have traveled by plane before, but while we're reclining in our seats, the pilots and crew are working hard to keep the flight operating safely. Sometimes, however, mistakes are made, so put your tray tables up, because today we're taking a look at 15 close calls in aviation. Number 15. Ural Airlines Flight 178. Birds getting caught in an airplane's engine is unfortunately a common occurrence. Typically, it doesn't amount to anything more than turbulence, but in 2019, Ural Airlines Flight 178 left the airport in Moscow, Russia, headed for Ukraine, and very shortly after its takeoff found itself in quite the predicament. A flock of birds got caught in both engines, causing them to lose power. Naturally, the plane carrying 233 people began to lose altitude and needed to make an emergency landing. Luckily for Flight 178, the airplane was able to land in a flat cornfield less than 2 miles from the airport. Because of the engines losing power, the landing was more of a crash. 50 passengers were able to receive immediate medical attention on site, and 29 were taken to a nearby hospital. But in the end, all 233 people on board lived to tell the tale. As for the aircraft, though, it was damaged beyond repair. Number 14. Miracle on the Neva. Back in 1963, another airplane took off on an ill-fated flight from a Moscow airport. Nicknamed the Squeeze Tu-104, the Tupolev Tu-124 aircraft needed to make an emergency landing in the Neva River, in what is now the city of St. Petersburg. So what exactly happened? Well, almost immediately after takeoff, the airplane encountered several technical issues, and the landing gear was stuck at the halfway point and unable to fully retract. The pilots requested they turn back to their original airport in Moscow, but permission was denied due to heavy fog in the area. Quickly running out of options, the pilots had to make the split-second decision. They would carry on and attempt to land on the unpaved road of a nearby airport, but the technical issues on board only escalated and the gauges stopped working. Needing to reduce the weight of the plane, the crew dumped most of the fuel, meaning that the amount of time they could now spend in the air was limited, and true fear was setting in. When the engines finally died, the pilots made their way to the Neva River with a rough but successful landing. With the help of tugboats, the aircraft made it back to shore, and everyone on board walked away unscathed. The incident became known as the Miracle on the Neva. Number 13. Air Canada Flight 759. In July of 2017, Air Canada Flight 759 was making a routine flight between Toronto and San Francisco early in the morning. Despite passing through thunderstorms halfway through the flight, everything was normal. But just 2 hours away from their destination, the crew began feeling ill. The pilots received a notice from the San Francisco Air Traffic Control that the original tarmac for their arrival had changed due to renovations, and that lighting and visibility would be extremely limited. Unfortunately, due to the fact that the pilots were feeling under the weather, they didn't take notice of the warning. They learned the hard way with an incredibly close call when they went in for a landing. Already on the tarmac was an Airbus A340, which the Air Canada pilots failed to see until they were just 14 feet away from what could have been a deadly collision. Luckily, the pilots were able to pull up at the last second and make a proper landing shortly after. Since the incident, though, flight number 759 has never been used again. Number 12. Japan Airlines Boeing 747 and DC-10. In 2001, 2 Japanese airlines just barely missed what could have been the worst collision in aviation history. The story starts with a Boeing 747 carrying over 400 passengers leaving Tokyo en route to the island of Okinawa. Another DC-10 was flying from South Korea to its Tokyo destination. The pilots of both aircraft were given notice from air traffic control that their paths were about to cross. This would result in a mid-air collision, which was strange because both the flights were supposed to be separated from one another by about 2,000 feet of altitude. What happened was an air traffic control trainee had made a rookie mistake, overlooking air traffic above Tokyo, and a message for the DC-10 to change course never went through. Even when supervisors got involved, things only got worse. They were using the wrong flight numbers to reach out to the pilots on the collision course. It was up to the captain of the Boeing 747 to make the last-minute maneuver, diving downwards to barely avoid the incoming DC-10. In the end, the 747 and the DC-10 missed each other by only 35 feet, and everyone thankfully walked away with their lives. Number 11. Miracle on the Hudson. The next close call on our list is perhaps the most well-known, so well-known in fact that it became a Hollywood film. The miracle on the Hudson began one morning in 2009 as a U.S. Airways Airbus left from LaGuardia Airport in New York en route to North Carolina. Shortly after leaving the tarmac in New York, geese were sucked into the plane's engines, causing dual engine failure mid-flight. Air traffic control advised the pilots to turn back to LaGuardia for a safe landing, but the now famous Captain Sullenberger told them it was too late for that. The next best thing he could do was make for a nearby airport in New Jersey, but in reality the plane wouldn't make it, and Sullenberger needed to land the plane now. He let air traffic control know where he would land the plane, in the Hudson River in the middle of a New York winter. The rest, as they say, is history, and local boats and ferries came to the passengers and crew's rescue once the plane landed on the water. Number 10. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. The next close call on our list can be chalked up to a faulty engine design that caused an investigation from the National Transportation Safety Board of the United States. In April 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 was leaving from New York LaGuardia, heading to Dallas, when something seriously went wrong. The plane's engine, with a fan blade design that had already been called into question, gave out. The pilots thought it was due to an engine fire, but during the initial climb, one of the engine fan blades broke loose. Fragments of the fan blade had shattered, striking the plane's wing, the fuselage, and even a cabin window, causing depressurization. Needless to say, this flight quickly became a nightmare for everyone on board, especially anyone with a window seat, because the engine began to come apart mid-air. While the pilots diverted the plane to Philadelphia International Airport, the damage was already done. Not only was the plane heavily damaged, but the depressurization of the cabin gave way to fatal injuries for one passenger. Number 9. Qantas A380 Nosedive. A Qantas A380 leaving Los Angeles LAX for Melbourne provided everyone on board for what was probably the longest 10 seconds of their life while flying over the Pacific Ocean. But another aircraft, Qantas F-12, had departed the same airport on a similar trajectory just 2 minutes before. And while the two planes were separated by 1,000 feet of altitude, Qantas F-12 had created a pretty substantial wake of turbulence for the plane behind it. Passenger aircraft are designed to withstand large-scale turbulence, but the pilot of Qantas A380 still needed to take decisive action for the safety of everyone on board. To get out of the vortex of turbulence, she took the plane for a nosedive for a full 10 seconds. And despite the absolute fear experienced by everyone on board as their plane unexpectedly went straight down, no one sustained any injuries, and the plane made it to its destination in one piece.
We're constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button.
Number 8. United Flight 328, Colorado. While the next entry on our list took place in the air, the real ramifications were felt by someone on the ground. United Flight 328 was forced to make an emergency landing after serious engine issues caused debris to fall from the plane. A video was taken by passengers of the engine catching fire and the cowling falling down to the earth. One man in Colorado was in for a rude awakening that morning when he heard what sounded like a car crash in his yard. But it wasn't a car crash, it was a piece of the United Flight 238's engine. Luckily for him, no one was hurt, but his son had just left for work minutes before the steel debris came hurtling through the air. And while the entire ordeal in the air lasted from 30 to 40 minutes, the plane was able to safely land at a nearby airport, and everyone walked away from the situation unharmed. Number 7. Flight 611. The next close call on our list stands out from the rest, not because it ended badly, but because the whole situation is so insane. In 2018, a Boeing 737-800 with India Express had taken off from Dubai International Airport towards the United Arab Emirates, but had hit a localizer antenna and a wall upon takeoff. But much to air traffic control's surprise, the pilots allegedly didn't even notice. But we're sure that the passengers did. Despite the damage done to the aircraft, the flight continued with the plane maintaining cruising altitude for the next 3 hours. It wasn't until the airport's officers got a hold of the pilots, letting them know what had happened, that the flight was diverted to another Indian airport in Mumbai. Because the incident was so suspect, the 2 pilots were suspended and the incident was under investigation. Number 6. LAX Jetpack. When pilots take to the skies, the last thing they expect to see flying alongside them is another human being. But that's exactly what a commercial pilot flying out of LAX saw. Upon takeoff, the American Airlines airliner reported that a man in a jetpack had come within 300 yards of the plane. And while that may seem like a long distance, the pilot was sure of what he saw. Naturally, the FBI had to investigate the case and figure out just what exactly was flying near the aircraft. And while jetpacks do exist, flying one in commercial airspace is a big no-no. Investigations have so far come up short. Most have speculated that the jetpack man was really a drone in the distance. Number 5. Beechcraft Super King. The U.S. State Department wanted to show off their Beechcraft Super King, but as we've seen so far on this list, nothing ever really goes to plan when it comes to aviation. As the small plane was getting ready for a runway landing, the landing gear collapsed. The pilot had let air traffic control know, and rescue teams were on the tarmac ready to go, but the plane still needed to land. And while the landing itself could have been much worse, it was far from graceful. The landing gear quickly gave way upon impact, and the aircraft slid and spun down the runway on its belly. At that point, all the pilot could do was hope for the best. Luckily, the emergency staff was at the ready, and no one was hurt. Number 4. Air Niugini Boeing 737-800. Here's another case of locals coming to the rescue of a close call. In September of 2018, an Air Niugini flight from Papua New Guinea on its way to Micronesia had a run-in with some bad weather conditions, which forced the pilots to take immediate action. Everything was manageable until the plane encountered a torrential downpour during the final leg of the flight. As the plane went in for a landing, it missed the tarmac by 500 meters and found itself instead in the waters of the Pacific Ocean. So what started out as a routine flight became a very serious swim to shore during a storm. But luckily for the 47 people on board, no one was seriously injured, and the local fishermen came to their rescue, ferrying them off to safety. Number 3. Shenzhen Airlines Flight 9247. Panjihua Airport in China was built in 2003 on top of a mountain 6,500 feet above sea level and is known for its small size, bad flying weather, and obviously its location. In 2020, Shenzhen Airlines Flight 9247 was at the mercy of the airport's notoriety. While the flight itself was smooth, it wasn't until the landing preparation that things changed. As the aircraft approached the mountain runway, the flight was put into a holding pattern due to poor visibility and weather conditions. The small passenger plane carrying 99 people on board missed the runway, hit the ground, and was punctured in 2 places with holes almost 20 feet across. To make matters even worse, the pilot failed to report the incident for a full hour. The aircraft suffered further damage to its lights, antenna, and fuselage, which could have spelled disaster for the flight if things had gone differently. Number 2. Cocoa Beach Air Show. Florida beachgoers were treated to a free but terrifying aviation show in 2021 when a World War II-era fighter made an emergency landing in the water. The incident was part of the nearby Cocoa Beach Air Show off Satellite Beach, Florida, but the emergency landing was not part of the theatrics. The plane moved quickly and the engine roared just above the swimmers' heads at an altitude that was a little too close for comfort. Luckily, no one was hurt, which was a miracle seeing how close the aircraft was to the 1,000 bystanders on the beach. Of course, as soon as the plane crash-landed on the shore, everyone came to the pilot's rescue. Apparently, the decades-old aircraft suffered a mechanical issue mid-flight, and professional help was ready and waiting on site. Number 1. Northwest Airlines Flight 188. There are lots of factors that added up to Northwest Airlines Flight 188's close call, but the ending of the story is certainly a bizarre one. In 2009, the aircraft left for a routine flight from San Diego, California to Minneapolis, Minnesota, but it never made it to its destination. So then what happened? Well, it was a mix of incorrect radio frequencies, miscommunication between the crew, too much radio chatter, and overall negligence. It was a disaster, to say the least. The pilots had simply stopped paying attention to their route and missed not just the airport, but the entire city of Minneapolis by more than 150 miles. Before anyone knew what was wrong, Northwest Airlines Flight 188 was flying over Winnipeg, Canada. They were not even in the right country. Air traffic control on the ground had assumed the worst and was ready to scramble fighter jets until the pilots finally radioed in. The incident sparked an internal investigation, but the pilots gave the excuse that they weren't paying attention because they were checking their laptops. It's a very silly excuse for what could have been a dangerous situation.
Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.